welcome to the stage, Anne Widdecombe.
I'm just going to ask you a few questions. The first one is, if we stay in the EU, will we stay in control of our own laws? And the second is it possible both to be in the EU and to control our own borders? And is it possible to be in the EU and to control our own trade? And finally, is it possible to be in the EU and to be governed by our own democratically elected government? Well, those 4 no's, ladies and gentlemen, are the answer to people who say that we did not know what we were voting for. We knew exactly what we were voting for. And we also know what the Remainers were voting for. They want us to have no control over our own laws, our own borders, our own trade, or to be governed by our own democratically elected government. That was what they were voting for. How could anybody with an ounce of pride in Britain vote for that? We were faithfully promised in 2016, that whatever was decided in that referendum would be upheld. And they didn't stop there. In 2017, both major parties stood on manifestos which said that we would have a Brexit. And what is more, Theresa May's manifesto went further. It said in black and white that no deal was better than a bad deal. And they have spent the last 2 years reneging on those manifestos. And then people say to us, why haven't we got a manifesto? What is the point of having manifestos when you abandon them at the first inconvenience? Well, you know, I think this is the message we send to Westminster. They have a choice. Either they let Britain leave the EU, or we will make sure they leave Westminster. Thursday is not the end, it is the beginning. It is was the beginning of getting true democracy back into this country. It is the beginning of making sure that we are governed with competence, with openness, and with fairness. And above all, it is the beginning of making sure that it is the people's will that is implemented, not the will of those who go against us. You know, the problem is really very simple. We have a nation which wants to leave the EU, and we have a parliament which wants to remain in the EU. Well, we have to show them who's the boss. And it is both parties. Jeremy Corbyn produced a manifesto that said very clearly that the result of the referendum would be implemented. And although it's quite true that the government has made a complete and utter mess of Brexit, they couldn't have done it without the full cooperation of the Labour Party. I mean, there we were immediately after the local elections. We weren't even standing, and yet people were writing us in on their ballot papers. And the thing I enjoyed most was the expression on Jeremy Corbyn's face. They'd been boasting that they were going to make 400 gains, and they made 82 losses. And that was the Prime Minister's opportunity. She should have said, Jeremy, look, we're both in big trouble. We have to deliver Brexit. Instead of which she said to him, oh, Jeremy, what would you like? Would you like a customs union? Oh, certainly. Would you like to stay aligned to the single market? Oh, certainly. To be governed by EU law? Oh, Jeremy, just tell me how much of the EU law you want us to be governed by. You know, I said at the beginning of this campaign that we had the worst Prime Minister since Anthony Eden. Well, I apologise to Anthony Eden. How often have you heard that if we leave the EU, everything is going to be chaos? Do you remember that we were told if we even dared to vote to leave the EU, everything was going to be chaos? In fact, if we leave the EU, we have a really bright future ahead of us. We can be part of the globe instead of part of some terrible, strong, protectionist bloc which actually thwarts economic development, economic enterprise, and our trade with the rest of the world. Oh, we're told we can't possibly trade if we're not part of the EU. How many countries aren't part of the EU, and have they all stopped trading? The fact is, we do not need the EU. The EU is a burden. Nobody can tell me, as they sometimes try, that really we are free to make our own laws, because I spent 7 years as a government minister, and I know how impossible it was for us to pass any law that the EU did not want, and how impossible it was for us to resist any law from them that we did not want. That is the reality. A gentleman called Guy Verhofstadt thinks we are a colony. Well, I would say this to him: colonies have a rather disconcerting habit of revolting. And when they have revolted, and when they have regained their independence, they can also have a habit of outstripping their former masters. Just ask America. So our aim on Thursday is twofold. The first is we have to send a message which will terrify Westminster. A message which they can only interpret one way, which is that their future actually depends on Britain's future being outside the EU. That is the first message. And the second message we have to send them is, we are not going to go away. This is not just about Thursday. This is making sure that Britain leaves the EU and has a proud, free, independent future, and we will stay around as long as it takes to deliver that. Now, I spent 55 years in a certain other party, and during that time, I did all the campaigning, all the canvassing, all the street markets, all the public meetings, and I never, in those whole 55 years, saw energy and commitment as I have seen during this campaign from our supporters. So let's build on that energy, build on that commitment. After Thursday comes Peterborough, and after Peterborough comes the next general election. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your commitment to a free, independent Britain. And let's remember that is what it is about. It is not about a party. It is about a country and a cause.